for inviting me here. It's my first visit to India, but I did take a few days before coming to visit with you to see other parts of India, and enjoyed it very much. I'd like to do three things with you tonight. The first is I would like to make a case, I hope a compelling case, that will be useful for you in your academic career, both as a scholar and as a teacher, to interact with real people. And what I mean by real people is practicing managers and real consumers, as opposed to students and make-believe consumers. Not that I have anything against students. I love students, but they are not always representative of either managers or consumers. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about managers this evening, though, and defer talking about consumers for another time. The second thing I want to do is to talk a little bit about an organization in which I'm involved, the Marketing Accountability Standards Board, which is really about the facilitation of interaction between academics and people in industry. And not just people in industry who are practicing marketing, but as you'll see, people who are in areas such as accounting, finance, and general management. And finally, I'd like to give you a few tips on how do you manage those people. If you're trying to interact with, facilitate the interaction with people in industry, what are some things that you should consider? I do believe that irrespective of whether you have any interest or inclination at all in raising money, and I'm a former dean, I did raise some money. In fact, I'm unabashedly bold when it comes to asking for money. And that's part of the job of being a dean. But whether you want to do that or not, there's still some value in talking with people in management. There's also some value in doing so because, first of all, it's very stimulating. And I'm going to show you some discussion related to MASB, Marketing Accountability Standards Board, that I hope you will find very stimulating. Secondly, it's valuable because it's real problems, and you've already heard a bit about that today already. If you want to have impact, solve real problems, and real problems come packaged with real managers. They're dealing with problems day to day. In fact, the reality is that most managers don't solve problems. In fact, managers would love to have neatly wrapped problems. What they get instead are messes. And then what they have to do is to unbundle those messes and actually define some problems. And actually that's one of the things that we in academics can do. We don't have to solve the whole mess. We don't have to run the company. But what we can do is to help a manager articulate a very specific problem to which we can bring a very specific solution. So if you help solve real problems, there's the opportunity for potential impact. You get really good feedback. It's different feedback from what you will get from your academic colleagues. That's also very valuable feedback, and I encourage you to get that as well. But managers are going to give you a different kind of feedback that will improve your work, that will suggest questions that perhaps you haven't really considered before, may suggest implications that you hadn't considered before, and there's a real opportunity in working with management to get great data. And you'll see in parens, maybe. And the reason for that is sometimes the data aren't as great as you had hoped that they were going to be once you actually get into the data. And secondly, even if it's great data, they may not let you publish it. So there's a risk. And there are some downsides to trying to work with managers. First of all, you're going to be dealing with relatively long time frames. The organization I'll talk about in a minute, MASB, was founded in 2004. We are just about to start publishing some work. Fortunately, I was tenured at the time, so I didn't have to worry too much about the publication implications of at least that stream of work. But we are talking about very long time frames for a whole variety of reasons, ranging from just getting organizational alignment, to getting the legal department to approve what you've done, to working through the review process. There is a tendency to push for very specific solutions when you're working with managers. They get paid to solve problems. They get paid to come up with individual immediate solutions. That's reasonable, that's normal, and if you're going to work with them, that's something you need to be prepared for. Doesn't mean you have to come up with the solutions, you just need to be prepared to understand that that's part of their imperative. This can be very high-risk work. The projects often are difficult, they're often ill-defined. You run the risk of managers changing jobs in the middle of a project, and you run the risk that the results may not turn out as you had hoped. So there's some high risk here, but there's also, as I've indicated, some high potential return. And as I mentioned, the whole issue of getting permission to publish can sometimes be an issue, although that can typically be finessed. Perhaps the most stimulating work that I've done in working with managers has been over the last 10 years when I've worked with an organization that had its advent as something called the Boardroom Project. And while, yes, our intention was to influence the boardroom of corporations, the name is somewhat less applicable than that. We called ourselves the Boardroom Project because we met in a restaurant called the Boardroom the first time we met. Subsequently, it has evolved into an incorporated organization that's very much committed to the interaction of marketing, finance, and accounting. Our objective, and I won't read you the whole long list here, our objective here is to really move marketing into a greater accountability. Our sense is that the quality movement has demonstrated that you can develop standardized metrics and standardized processes in the operations area. We're coming to that about 50 years late in marketing, but it's long overdue. We're also hearing from senior managers more and more that they want greater accountability on the part of the marketing function, and when they look at that 25% of revenue that in most large corporations constitutes what's spent on marketing, that's a very, very real target for cutting. And there's a real need to defend why we're spending that money. Our partners now include some household names, at least in the U.S., Conagra, Frito-Lay, General Motors, Miller Coors, Kimberly-Clark, Hershey, a whole host of interdisciplinary organizations, the Association of National Advertisers, the American Marketing Association, the American Research Foundation, the 4A's, the ARF, AC Nielsen, Starcom MediaVest, Corbrand, and a whole host of others. As somebody pointed out earlier this afternoon, in marketing we have no shortage of data. We have no shortage of measures or metrics. We're literally swimming in data. The problem is that data often doesn't have common meaning. There was a study done recently by the Advertising Research Foundation looking at the definitions of common marketing terms, and they found that that even within the same organization, the same marketing term could, when actually operationalized, could have 15 different meanings in the same company. You can imagine how frustrating it is for a senior manager to hear market share discussed in a meeting and everybody means something different by the term market share. That's a fundamental problem for us in marketing, is we haven't really established really standardized definitions. We certainly haven't established standardized metrics or standardized processes. But in talking with our friends in finance, marketing and finance agree on a number of things, I'm happy to say, because we all still have jobs. It's marketing's job to create, build, and sustain brands. Brands produce current and future economic benefits for the firm. They're important intangible assets that are owned by the enterprise. Brands create options for the firm. Brand extension is an option. And a lot of the value of firms are actually in the options they own. And in fact, brands represent much of the value of the firm. And yet we don't have a good way of valuing brands. In fact, the accounting profession only values brands when there is a transaction or there is a disastrous event that requires a downgrading of the brand. If you create a brand inside the organization, currently it's not valued, which seems a little strange. So, marketing activities I think we can all agree, are to enhance the strength of brand among customers, to in a manner that positively impacts financial returns, both in the short term and over time. But there's no generally accepted standards for measuring the success of this marketing function. Extant measures do not agree in terms of either the magnitude or the direction of change, and there are lots of measures, but few that are actually tied to financial performance. And that's the big criticism we hear from general managers and financial managers in organizations, is we can't link what we do to financial performance. And that's what MASB is all about. And so I've spent the last 10 years interacting with managers, marketing, finance, and accounting people, talking about these kinds of issues and how we can be helpful as a marketing profession in addressing those things. A number of the projects that we've completed, to give you a sense of some of the interesting things we've been doing. We've completed a project on marketing productivity, effectiveness, and accountability. We've done kind of an academic review of the role of standards. We've done some C-level interviews on marketing accountability. We've looked at various methods of brand valuation. We've looked at long-term impact of advertising, what's known. We've looked at forecasting and how we improve it, particularly in the context of TV. And I won't read all of those to you, but a very, very long list of very active projects, every one of which has involved a collaboration between academics and people on the practice side. We've got a couple of projects that are underway. One, we're working on a marketing metrics catalog and a common marketing language. That is, we're working on creating a common dictionary, common defined terms. We started out on Wikipedia. The problem with Wikipedia is anybody can go in and change the definition. It's hardly a standard. So we're now working with AMA to become the repository of those standards. We've been working with VK on applying customer lifetime value to consumer packaged goods in various target segments. Very interesting work that we've done. We have a book that'll shortly be appearing. And two projects that I'm very excited about really revolve around brand investment and valuation standards and improving financial reporting. We'd really like to get marketing activities and outcomes on the financial report in some way. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to put brands on the balance sheet, but we might want to address them in some of the management discussion that occurs if we really believe that the branding is important. And we do believe. This is from a presentation by the controller of Microsoft, another of those interesting people that we get to interact with as a part of this project. He demonstrated that quite compellingly that as little as about 35, 40 years ago, about 20% of the value of the firm was in intangibles. The rest of it was in hard assets, buildings, equipment, and so forth. Today, about 80% of the firm is in intangibles. Dramatic change in what constitutes value in a firm, and yet all of our metrics, not only in marketing, but if you talk to the accounting people, they will agree, really haven't caught up with that. And the question among those intangibles is how much of that is brand. Some of that, no doubt, is patents, options, and other things, but clearly a lot of it must be brands. So should we care? Well, the answer is yes. There are a number of firms that are in the business of reporting the value of brands, and they get a lot of business press. But what you'll discover is that none of them agree with one another. They not only don't agree with one another in terms of the absolute value of particular brands, they don't even agree on the change in direction from quarter to quarter in terms of brands. So if that's the case, of what use are these measures? Certainly raises questions about their validity and utility, but they get widely cited. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So part of our objective in our brand investment project is actually to track a series of brands over time. And we're just early in the process of what, remember I said is a long-term project, a 3-year project, where we'll be collecting data on 6 brand categories in a variety of different industries in an effort to try to link more specifically advertising and marketing activities to brand value. And I won't spend time there. But the basic idea here is to try to take our brand activities here, all those things we do in the name of branding, and that supposedly influence brand strength, however that's measured, and then begin to turn that into metrics that we can then link to financial performance. Things like market share, volume, price premium, and then ultimately into some accounting and finance metrics. So why is this important? Well, it's important because finance actually tells us, and from our discussions with them, that they really would like us to be able to address the financial implications of what we do in marketing. And we're not able to do that. By the way, they would prefer we do this rather than they do it for us. And related to this then is how do we report those efforts to shareholders and other stakeholders. We have another project underway that's become very fascinating because we're talking with accountants, both nationally and internationally, as well as stock analysts, about what kind of information would be useful about marketing activities that would be reported in a public domain. Both of these projects are underway. By the way, if you go to the THEMASB, THEMASAB.org, you'll see our website, and all of the information here that I've given you is present there. But so it's an interesting example of what you can do in terms of collaboration with your academic colleagues. A tremendous number of ideas that have come out that have resulted in publishable papers, that have resulted in working papers, and it's simply a matter of people, academics, who've come and put themselves in the room to listen to what others have to say. All of our work is done in collaboration. We have teams that work on projects. As I mentioned earlier, those are teams of academics and teams of industry people. They're also very active industry people. So in closing, let me just make some suggestions for working with industry partners. First of all, choose the right partners. Not everybody in industry is a good partner. Choose people who are intellectually curious, who are interested in what you bring to the party and interested in what you want to learn, as well as having their own agenda. It's important to partner as high in the organizational structure as possible. The higher in the organization you can go, the more likely, one, you'll cut through red tape. Part of that red tape is getting permission to publish papers. But you're also more likely to cut red tape around getting access to data, around getting access to people, and about really identifying critical issues. Over time, build relationships. Some of the relationships I built with industry people go back longer than I care to remember. They go back to my advertising days, back when I was working with Bill Wells at Needham Harper and Steers, and many of those relationships have been the basis for a lot of published research, and in fact, it was MASB. The genesis of MASB came out of some of those relationships. Do establish appropriate expectations and do that early. If you're going to work with industry people, be sure they understand why you're there and what you think you can help them with and what you can't help them with. Working with industry people, be prepared to do most of the work. They're busy people. It's not that they're lazy. It's not that they're not intellectually curious. They just have other things that occupy their time. And when the CEO calls and says, I want a meeting, your telephone conference call is probably going to get canceled. And you can reschedule it. But just be prepared to take on much of the burden, recognizing what the industry partner can provide. And finally, do recognize that this is a two-way street. There's a lot of great opportunity for scholarship, for placement of students, for speakers in the classroom, tremendous amount of opportunity to create value for what we do in an educational enterprise. But it's also very important to articulate and deliver something of value to the partner. So think through what you can deliver to that partner and be sure that they understand it and they appreciate it.